Thank you for listening to this sermon from Valley Life Church. If you'd like to learn more, you can go to our website at valleylife.church, or better yet, come be our guest on a Sunday morning.
God over the nations. We continue our sermon series through the entire book of Isaiah. If you're new here, I'll do my best to catch you up. We've gone through basically every verse in these 17 chapters of Isaiah, and by God's grace, we'll go through every word of every verse of every chapter in Isaiah before it's all over. And what we've seen so far is essentially what we've watched is the oncoming Assyrian invasion. I'm going to keep saying it like that because there's Syria in this story, and there is Assyria. Assyria is the mighty war machine, the Assyrian army. Everybody in this part of the world at this time in human history would be afraid of the Assyrian army. They were known far and wide, and they were coming in. They were coming around the Fertile Crescent, coming down south to Israel and to Judah, which, if you might remember, those are two different places at this time in history. Israel in the north, Judah in the south. The capital of Judah is Jerusalem, where the king is. And the Assyrian army, you can almost hear their boots as they march steadily down south, and everyone is terrified. We've seen that. Secondly, we've seen that God is forever like himself. Ever since chapter 1 of Isaiah, as we've gone all the way through, we've seen God is the same as he's always been. There's no such thing as the angry God of the Old Testament and the gracious God of the New Testament. He is forever like himself. We've also seen that the heart of man is basically forever like itself. Men have changed only in our technology. Mankind is, maybe we carry iPhones in our pocket, but we're not smarter and better off than they were. That they were navigated by the stars, and you have to look up Apple just to get home sometimes. So this man is forever. We struggle with the same things. We relate to our circumstances in very, very similar ways. Assyria now is invading Syria. Assyria, the mighty war machine, is coming down south, going through Syria. And it's important to our story that you remember, or maybe you're just now informed, that Judah is tempted to make an alliance with Syria. In fear of the Assyrian army, everyone's sort of looking to partner up and to make a coalition. And God's people have to decide in this situation, are we going to make an ungodly alliance and try to partner up with the people who are not the people of God? Another thing you'll need to know for this text is that Damascus is mentioned in this story, and Damascus is the capital of Syria. The Assyrian army is coming. They will need to take over Damascus and make the Syrian people afraid when they come through Damascus. Damascus is important because it connects Mesopotamia with Egypt, and it's always been on the trade route there. It's super important. But suffice to say, Assyria is invading. And I've told y'all before, early in the morning on Sunday morning, I go through all my notes with my wife, Brooke, and she, kind of tells me, hey, that I didn't understand that part, or that wasn't as strong as you thought it was, keep working, or whatever it is. And as I got through this today, she just kind of sighed and said, when is Assyria going to get there? Like, we've watched them for weeks now, months. Here they come. And I keep saying, here they come. They're about to invade. They're about to invade. And she's saying what some of y'all are too. We know they're coming. We know they're not going to win. Assyria is going to fall as well. She was almost like, can we get this over with and move to something else in the story? But since we know, yes, it's scary for the people. It's not scary for us. We know that they're not going to win. What is the real thrust of this story today? And it's, I would say, as your pastor, it's this. It's that God's people, whomever they are, God's people in this room, and I'm not foolish enough to think that everybody here is walking with the Lord or is a Christian. Some of you are here because a friend invited you and you're exploring Christianity, or you're really not sure where you stand with God, or how you're going to, some people say, get in. I want to get into Christianity. I don't know how to get in. Maybe that's where you are. But those who are God's people, we live out our history among those who are not the people of God. And that's what's happening in this story. Lots of people who are not God's people, and enemies and friends, and we live out our histories among those who are the people of the world. And I guess the question becomes, how is it that we handle the consequences and calamities of life, whatever circumstances we find ourselves in, when that happens to the entire neighborhood? If you're in Desert Hills or you're in Anthem, it happens to all of Anthem, or it happens to your neighbors maybe one by one, but we experience very similar things. And how do we conduct ourselves as the people of God among those who are not God's people? And what Israel has to learn in our story today is that if your plan, sometimes I call it your practical public policy, if your plan is, I'm going to do it the way everyone does it, or I'm going to identify my salvation or my deliverance with the world, then you will suffer in the same ways the world suffers when God brings whatever he brings. Moving to verse 1. This is the way it starts. Isaiah writing an oracle concerning Damascus. That's the way it starts. And I told you, Damascus is the capital city of that nation called Assyria. And we've thought about this before. Isaiah is a preacher. He may be writing these things out or preaching them, and someone writes it down. These are essentially sermons. And the people of Damascus are not reading through the book of Isaiah. It's an oracle concerning Damascus, but it's not like the people of Damascus are going to hear this. It's essentially for the people of God to think about Damascus. Ephraim, which is the nickname for Israel, Ephraim or Israel is seeking their security up in that capital city called Damascus. And that's not God's plan at all. The people of God are not supposed to identify our salvation or identify our security among the people who are not God's people. And in fact, it's a reversal of the plan. If you think about it, like you would be able to think about this if you took some time, and I can tell you, but you would figure this out. God chose Abraham. Why? Well, to make a people, and he gave him land. But from that people is going to come the salvation of the world. Oh, that's right, because Jesus is the King of the Jews. Jesus is the Jewish Messiah, and whether you're Jew or Gentile, anyone can come to Jesus Christ and be saved. So Abraham's choosing by God was for all the people. The people of God are for the salvation of the people who are not yet the people of God. And this story flips that backwards so that God's people are looking to not God's people for some kind of deliverance or safety or security. That's what's happening when he says an oracle concerning Damascus. Let me bring up the Damascus issue is essentially what he's saying there. And verse 1 continues, behold, Damascus will cease to be a city. It will become a heap of ruins. The cities of Aroer are deserted. They will be for flocks which lie down, and none will make them afraid. And we've seen this over and over in Isaiah. He does that thing where he says, you know that big, strong city? Maybe it's Phoenix. You know Phoenix or even like Salt Lake City or Las Vegas. There's going to come a day when there's nothing there but animals. He said that a few different times about a few different places. Here he says it about Damascus. Verse 3. The fortress will disappear from Ephraim, the nickname for Israel. The fortress will disappear from Ephraim and the kingdom from Damascus. He says, you've tied those two things together. The people of Israel want to tie their fortunes to the people of Damascus. They're both going away then. The fortress disappear from Ephraim, the kingdom of Damascus. And the remnant of Syria will be like the glory of the children of Israel, declares the Lord of hosts. And this is a little hint. In verse 3, it's, you're watching a movie, and if you're paying really close attention, there's maybe some foreshadowing, and you can see what's coming at the end. Here is a little foreshadowing, a little hint for you. Could it be that non-Jewish, so Gentile people can be like the glory of the people who are Jewish people? And this is saying, yes, indeed, that is God's plan. God chose Abraham so that all the peoples of the world can get in on the goodness of God. But first, we've got to go down this destruction track. Verse 4. And if you're organizing your notes, some of you I know like to take your copious notes and you want them all detailed and everything. Here you go. Point number 1. In that day, which is the way he starts a lot of these sentences with the phrase, in that day. In that day, some will be spared. That's the point of verses 4, 5, 6. It goes, in that day, the glory of Jacob will be brought low, and the fat of his flesh will grow lean. That's not a good thing. I know some of you might say, well, I would love to go from fat to lean. That sounds fantastic. Do your keto or whatever you got to do. This is not that. This is about things are getting bad and it's malnutrition. It might be sickness or a wasting disease. He's saying this is going to be bad times. In that day, people are going to be unhealthily lean. Verse 5, and it shall be as when the reaper gathers standing grain, and his arms harvest the ears, as when one gleans the ears of grain in the valley of Rephaim. It's a picture of someone wasting away, and then there's this big harvest. Verse 6 says, gleanings will be left in it as when an olive tree is beaten. 2 or 3 berries in the top of the highest bough, 4 or 5 on the branches of a fruit tree, declares the Lord God of Israel. Now, I know that's some sort of a metaphor you may be not familiar with, but yesterday I got to go to the men's breakfast. We have a men's breakfast, on Saturdays, and Richard Schmidt, a lot of you know Richard. Richard's in our elder training program, and Richard preached to the men this text. And right now in Cottonwood, he's up preaching in Cottonwood to a church up there where we'll start Valley Life Cottonwood. Richard's preaching there today, this text. And here's what I heard. Richard said, because he's been studying this, he said they would take nets and put them underneath the olive trees to catch the olives that would fall, and then they would beat those trees. And you can imagine how it goes. You beat them, you want to get all the olives you can, but you're not going to get every single one. Maybe there's 3 or 4 there up at the top of the highest bough, maybe 4 or 5 left. And that's what is the point of this passage. God is saying it's going to go really bad, a wasting disease. People don't have enough to eat. They go from fat to lean, and it's going to be destruction. Now, some will be spared. In that day, some will be spared. But here's the thing you can take away. For us, God is behind that destruction. And God is behind that remnant. He's the God of both. In that day, some will be spared. Number 2, verse 7, in that day, some will look. You might say, in that day, some will look and see. What they're looking for, they're going to find it. Verse 7, in that day, man will look to his maker, and his eyes will look on the Holy One of Israel. He will not look to the altars, the work of his hands. He will not look on what his fingers have made, either the Asherim or the altars of incense. And again, you could count up how many times he uses that word look, which is incidentally is why we're going to sing the song today. Look and see our God and celebrate our God. In that day, he will look to his maker. There are going to be some that do that, and they will not look to the altars and the stuff that they've made. This is what you need to know about this part. In the end, in the final analysis, there are really only 2 religions. There is the worship of Jesus Christ as the Son of God, and there is idolatry. That's it. Whatever else there is, whatever else you got or could come up with, there is worshiping Jesus Christ as the Son of God, worshiping the maker or worshiping the made, stuff that people just made up. There's Buddhism, Mormonism, secularism, even transgenderism, if you want to call that one a religion. Whatever you got, there's the worship of our stuff, and then there is the worship of God. You can worship what you do, or you can worship God who has brought to us his good news. In Romans 1:25, it lays it out super binary like this. Because they exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the creature rather than the creator. That's the explanation. There is the worship of God and his son Jesus as God, or there is the worship of creation and created things. In Isaiah 44, it's kind of a long passage, but it's one of my favorites where he says, this is how silly this notion is when we worship what we've made. Isaiah says, you get an axe, you chop down a tree. You get that tree, you chop it into 2 pieces. You got 2 logs. You take 1 log and you throw it in the fire. You make some bread out of it. It keeps you warm and you're really glad. You take the other log and you carve out a little idol and you bow down and worship it and say, you're my maker. When you literally made it yourself and you burnt the other part in a fire. And we can say, yeah, he's totally right. Those people are goofballs, but we're the same. We worship with our hearts stuff that we ourselves have made. Anytime we look for significance or safety with the stuff that we can come up with, it's no different than idolatry. Number 3, in that day, some will forget. And forgetfulness is a bigger deal than we give it credit for. In fact, forgetfulness is the cause of much spiritual disaster. If I could make the point, look at this in verse 9. It goes, in that day, their strong cities will be like the deserted places of the wooded heights and hilltops, which they deserted because of the children of Israel, and there will be desolation. You got to keep in mind, Like Brooke said, the Assyrian army, when are they going to get there? Their boots, you can almost hear them on the hills as they're coming. And the people are looking for, what are we going to do? Where are we going to find safety? So they go into the strong cities. And Isaiah says, what are you doing? The strong cities are going to be like deserted places. You might as well watch the foxes go over what used to be a strong city for what's going to happen. And he's saying the practical public policy that you should employ is to turn to God. Their enemy, who is the king of Assyria, has said in another place in the Bible, the enemy has said, mere words are no strategy for warfare. I'm bringing troops and you want to bring prayers, and you have to decide. If we were just having coffee, I would ask you, you're going to have to decide. Do you think prayers and the public worship of God as your practical public policy is a good strategy for warfare, is a good strategy for safety or for significance in your heart? They say, we're going to run to the cities of our stronghold. Verse 10, it says, for you have forgotten the God of your salvation and have not remembered the rock of your refuge. And he's saying it there. It doesn't really sound like it in English, but he's trying to contrast and compare the strength of the city versus the strength of the rock of refuge. Which one seems safer to you? Which one seems safer to you? I know we don't normally talk back, and I really don't want you to. But what would it be like if I asked you, which one seems safer? To pray and to put your heart in the rock of your refuge of God, or to shore up your investments, or to arm yourself with weapons? Which one seems safer to you? When we forget you've forgotten the God of your salvation, it causes a lot of spiritual danger. In Psalm 78, it goes like this. The Ephraimites, remember that's Israel, the Ephraimites, armed with the bow, turned back on the day of battle. They did not keep God's covenant, but refused to walk according to his law. Now that word is refused. It seems like a willful, I don't want to do it. But he explains it in verse 11. They forgot his works and the wonders that he had shown them. It's a forgetting problem. And if we were to sit down and have coffee, I was discipling you, we were talking about our stories, I would say, you know what it's like to forget what God has done, and then you make practical public policy, like the way you're literally going to live your life, something besides God, and it never goes good. It's probably at the genesis point of a lot of your bad seasons of life, when you just forgot what God has done for you. In Psalm 78, verse 40, it goes, how often they rebelled against him in the wilderness and grieved him in the desert. They tested God again and again, provoked the Holy One of Israel. Well, that sounds like willful disobedience. Yeah, but he said it started with this. They did not remember his power or the day when he redeemed them from the foe. They just forgot what God is like, that he's forever like himself, and that your safest, most practical thing that you could do is to give it all to God. In 2 Peter 1:9, it's like a New Testament way of saying the exact same thing. It goes like this. For whoever lacks these qualities is so nearsighted that he's blind, having forgotten that he was cleansed from his former sins. And if you look at the genesis point of your bad seasons of life, whatever they are, I guarantee you that it goes back to forgetting what God has done for you. Here he says you forgot that you were cleansed from your former sins. Back in Isaiah 17, the one we're reading about here, he talks about the different kinds of forgetfulness. And the first one is forgetting how powerful God is. In verse 10, to get a running start. So you have forgotten the God of your salvation, have not remembered the rock of your refuge. Therefore, you plant pleasant plants and sow the vine branch of a stranger. Though you make them grow on the day that you plant them and make them blossom in the morning that you sow, yet the harvest will flee away in a day of grief and incurable pain. Which is a strange metaphor. I mean, it really is. The Assyrian boots, you can hear them coming. Chomp, chomp, chomp. It's danger. And he's picturing them as forgetting how powerful God is and saying, here come the Assyrians. Hurry, plant some geraniums. You planted lilacs in a war. You don't want to be a gardener in a war, right? Yes, warrior in a garden, but don't be a gardener in a war. And he says, you forgot how good and strong God is, and you went to plant these plants on a day of grief and incurable pain. You forgot the power of God. And the thing that you ended up trusting in is something you could stomp on. Then he changes the metaphor, and I don't know what to call it. It would be like value, what is valuable, or forgetting what's valuable, or forgetting what's worthwhile or worthy. Think about that. When he says, it's like you have taken what God has given that is valuable, and you step right over it to pick up something that is not valuable at all. My dad used to call that stepping over dollars to pick up dimes. Like you had what you want. You had God, and you stepped over the power and the value of God to get something that's not near as valuable. And I've thought about it like this. When we people, at the expense of joy in our family, we keep on working and working and working because I can get more money. And I'm going to leverage the joy in my family, mortgage the joy in my family to get some more money in hopes that that money will provide more joy in my family. You just stepped over joy to pick up dollars in hopes that dollars were going to give you joy. Or it's the same way when you say, to the detriment of family peace, I'm going to make chaos in this family. And maybe you say to you, look, it's going to be chaotic. I'm going to make chaos in this family because I got to spend more hours at work so that I can get enough money to bring peace into this family. Thanks, brother. I need a little help. And I know it's the American way. Believe me, I know. But there's a point at which we work hard, and there's a point at which we're chasing wealth. And Proverbs 23 says, do not toil to acquire wealth. Be discerning enough to desist. And you may not know much about discerning or desist, but you're going to have to figure it out. What is living to work and what is working to live? In Matthew 28, you can apply this to our health. I'll apply it now to health. In Matthew 28, it says, do not fear those who can kill the body, but cannot kill the soul. Rather fear him who can destroy both soul and body in hell. So what if you step over what God has given you, which is peace in the soul, in order to make yourself as healthy as you can get? Now, I'm going to increase my VO2 max by some impressive amount. And God is in charge of your heart and soul. As we move through the passage, he changes it. That was all about like a microcosm of the life of Israel and Syria with the impending invasion of Assyria. But then he says, but what about the whole world? That was very small, but let's apply it to the entire world, a macrocosm of history. In verse 12, he goes, the thunder of many people. So we've been talking about a couple of nations, with the scary nation being Assyria. He said, well, not just Assyria, Rome is going to come to power. Babylon's going to come to power. Eventually, Great Britain's going to come to power in the United States. The roar of many peoples. They thunder like the thundering of the sea. The roar of nations. They roar like the roaring of mighty waters. The nations roar like the roaring of many waters, but he will rebuke them and they will flee far away. Chased like chaff on the mountains before the wind and the whirling dust before the storm. At evening time, behold, terror. Before morning, they are no more. That's like a 12-hour span. A 12-hour span. At evening time, terror. Before morning, they're not even there. This is the portion of those who loot us and the lot of those who plunder us. If you take that whole section and put it into a little poem that I wrote a while ago, I put it on the screen. This will help you with that little passage. It goes like this. Many people, many nations, so much noise like a waterfall. He rebukes them. They flee and are far away. They are no more. This is what happens to those who plunder God's people. So much terror gone overnight. How do you apply that to your life? The thing that is tempting you to step over dollars to pick up dimes. The thing that is tempting you to step over the most practical public policy, which is the public and unashamed worship of God, in order to get what the world is doing. And what the world is doing will become nothing very soon. God snaps his fingers, and whatever is making you afraid today can be gone tomorrow. If it's a health scare, if it's a romantic entanglement, if it's financial fear, I'm worried we're going to be financially ruined. I'll never financially recover from this. And God says, I can snap my fingers and it's gone by tomorrow. What's the most practical public policy if there's a God like that? Serve him. Psalm 46, verse 6 says, the nations rage, kingdoms totter. He utters his voice and the earth melts. Be on his side. And then we move to chapter 18, but it's the same idea. In chapter 18, it starts off with the word ah. It's the same as he started off the verse 12 in the previous chapter. These sections go together. He's saying, land of whirring wings that is beyond the rivers of Cush. Now, you may not know what that is, but the land of whirring wings beyond the rivers of Cush, there's a lot of flying insects in Egypt. And at this point in time, Cush, or the Ethiopians, the Cushites or the Ethiopians, were in charge of Egypt. This is what's called the 25th Egyptian dynasty. That's not in your Bible. It's just a part of world history. The 25th Egyptian dynasty was when the Ethiopians, or the Cushites, had taken over the Egyptian territory. And it's the land of whirring wings that is beyond the rivers of Cush. In verse 2 it says, which send ambassadors by the sea and vessels of papyrus on the waters. So when the Cushites would get in their little papyrus rafts, they needed to be lightweight because the Nile has these waterfalls, lots of waterfalls. I guess they're called cataracts from what I read. But you have to get out of the water and pick up your boat and walk around the waterfall to put it back in the water. So there's these little vessels of papyrus on the waters. It says, go, you swift messengers, to a nation tall and smooth, to a people feared near and far, a nation mighty and conquering, whose land the rivers divide. And this isn't really a part of the sermon, but I do want to say, God here is delighting in the differences of his people. God made some people some color. He made some people the other color. And they have different ways. They have different capabilities. And here he's saying these are people who are tall and smooth, unlike the people we have been reading about who are not tall and smooth. But these Ethiopian people, God is delighting. I made them different than I made some of these other people. And I, for one, miss the days that we could revel in all of our differences and how different God made us. And the things that have happened in our nation and around the world have tried to steal that away from us, but the Bible is unmoved. God is proud of how he has made all of you differently. So then he says to the Cushites, to the Ethiopians, these people tall and smooth and very mighty and very swift, and they have these papyrus boats. He says, verse 3, all you inhabitants of the world, you who dwell on the earth, when a signal is raised on the mountains, look. When a trumpet is blown, hear. Now, I know this is kind of obscure, but it's like this. The Ethiopian king, I think his name is Pianka, if that matters to anybody. But the Ethiopian king, who's now in charge of this territory of Egypt, they're mighty, like they are fearsome. And they know Assyria is coming, and when Assyria is coming, it's not going to be good for any nation. And they're saying, we could team up with you guys. We could get a coalition going, and we would be able to protect you. So they sent emissaries or envoys in their little papyrus boats, and you might imagine them getting out of their boats, walking over to Jerusalem and saying to the king of Jerusalem, we're here, so we can protect you. And now again, Hezekiah has to decide, is my safety in the people around us, or is my safety in God? What is my most practical move at this point? The Cushites are saying, we can protect you. They come there, and it's kind of like, and I'm not saying this is what happened, but it's kind of like Isaiah hears about it, and he shows up as well. And he says to the Cushites, what you guys need to do is get back in your boat, go on back to the Nile, and tell everyone around that our hope is in God alone. We don't put our hope in any other nation. We are a religious people who is devoted to God. All you inhabitants of the world, tell everybody, you who dwell on the earth, when you see that signal raised on the mountains, look. When a trumpet is blown, hear. In verse 4, it says, for the Lord has said to me, I will look quietly from my dwelling. So God is saying, I will look quietly from my dwelling, like clear heat in the sunshine, like a cloud of dew in the heat of harvest. Does it seem like God has been quiet as the Assyrians march south? or whatever fear you have in your life? Does it seem like God has just been watching in quiet? Here he says, that's exactly what I've been doing. I'm the quiet watcher as the nations rage and kingdoms topple. I'm the quiet watcher when romance does what romance does, when finance does what finance does in your life. But there comes a time when God acts. Verse 5, for before the harvest, when the blossom is over and the flower becomes a ripening grape, in other words, when the time is right, he cuts off the shoots with pruning hooks, and the spreading of branches he lops off and clears away. And it sounds a lot like what Revelation says about the end of time. Another angel came out of the temple calling with a loud voice to him who sat on a cloud, put in your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is truly ripe. So he who sat on the cloud swung his sickle across the earth, and the earth was reaped. In Isaiah, he continues, he says, they shall all of them be left to the birds of the prey of the mountains and to the beasts of the earth, and the birds of prey will summer on them, and all the beasts of the earth will winter on them. So what Isaiah says to the Ethiopians who said, we can help you, is get back in your boat and go tell everyone who will listen to you that God waits. That's what he does. He's the quiet watcher. For the right time, when the time is right, he gathers his harvest, some for judgment and some for grace. Which is it going to be? Does it seem like God is slow? Does it seem like he's just waiting? God says, I wait like heat in the summer, not making a sound, but making a big difference. And when the time is right, I lop off branches, some for grace and some for judgment. So tell the world. Verse 7, at that time, tribute will be brought to the Lord of hosts, from a people tall and smooth, from a people feared near and far, a nation mighty and conquering, whose land the rivers divide. Those people, the Ethiopian Cushite people, he says, you're going to end up bringing tribute. To whom? Well, to Mount Zion, the place of the name of the Lord of hosts. And that's the way our section ends. That's the end of verse 7 in this section. And as a Bible reader and a Bible teacher, I just want to know, I wonder if it happened that way. That's what Isaiah says is going to happen. The Cushites say, we can help you because Assyria is obviously coming. And Isaiah, speaking for all of the nations, says, you know what? We really don't need your help. We need God's help. Anytime we try to partner up with other nations and sell our souls for safety, it never goes well. So get in your boat. God loves you, people. He has made you just the way he wants to make you, even your physical characteristics. And the best thing for you to do would be to tell all the people of the world. There's the Jewish people and everybody else is Gentiles. So tell all the Gentiles that you can find in your papyrus boats to come here and to worship God, because he's the true God, the only one who can deliver from whatever is coming. Today it's the Assyrians. Tomorrow it's the Babylonians. The day after that it's going to be Rome. And I wonder, did it work with Assyria coming? Well, like I've told y'all before, Isaiah is a series of sermons about history. But if you go to the Chronicles, 1st and 2nd Chronicles and 1st and 2nd Kings, you read the history behind those sermons. And in 2nd Chronicles chapter 32, it gives us the history of what happened. The Assyrian boots marching, coming south. They blow straight through Syria, no problem. Damascus is laid waste. They go through Lachish and these different places, and they're at the gates of Jerusalem. We've talked about this before, how there's mocking going back and forth. The Assyrians are like, you have no chance. Do not think that mere words are a strategy for warfare. You can't match war with your prayers. And Hezekiah takes the written documents, spreads them out before God, and he tears his clothes. He's already given all the gold he can find. He's even tore gold out of the temple and given it to Sennacherib, who is in charge of the Assyrians. And Sennacherib, he wants blood. He doesn't want gold. Here he comes. Spread out the accusations against God's people and against God. And it says that Isaiah and Hezekiah get together and they pray together. Verse 20, 2 Chronicles 32, Hezekiah the king and Isaiah the prophet, the son of Amoz, prayed because of this. And they cried to heaven. And the Lord sent an angel who cut off all the mighty warriors and the commanders and officers in the camp of the king of Assyria. Now, that's all that it says about that, but what does that mean? They all got sick. Maybe they got dysentery. Maybe they passed COVID to each other and everybody died, whatever it was. Or maybe the death angel came with some sort of a sword and there was blood. But however God did it, it was terror that night. And they woke up the next morning and it was all gone. 185,000 dead Assyrian soldiers. And if you're the king Sennacherib, what do? It says, so he returned with shame of face to his own land. And when he came into the house of his God, some of his own sons struck him down there with the sword. This is what happens to those who come against the people of God. Does it seem like God is slow to move? Does it seem like he's just waiting and watching? He says, that's exactly what I'm doing until the time is right. And then I put in my sickle and judgment comes. Some a harvest of grace, some a harvest of judgment. Verse 22, so the Lord saved Hezekiah and the inhabitants of Jerusalem from the hand of Sennacherib, king of Assyria, and from the hand of all his enemies. And he provided for them on every side. Now, from my perspective, that's exactly how God has treated me. I have to wait. I have to pray. And it's terror at night. I arose the next morning and it was gone. And he provided for me on every side. Verse 23, and many brought gifts to the Lord, to Jerusalem, and the precious things to Hezekiah, king of Judah. Well, if you're those other nations, you'd be so glad. The big threat is gone. The God of angel armies, who the people in Jerusalem serve, has spared all of us by destroying the Assyrians. So they sent all these gifts to Jerusalem and to Hezekiah, so that he was exalted in the sight of all the nations from that time forward. So you know what that means? That means just like Isaiah said, the Cushites, who said, we can protect you, sent gifts to Jerusalem, saying, thank your God for protecting us. And then in the New Testament, an Ethiopian who stumbled upon one of God's people named Philip was reading this same book, Isaiah. It says in the New Testament in Acts chapter 8 that he was reading Isaiah the prophet. It says, and the place where he read was that place in Isaiah that says, like a lamb before its shearer is silent, so he opened not his mouth. And he says to the preacher, who is Isaiah talking about? Of himself or of someone else? And Philip got up into the chariot and talked with this Ethiopian guy, and it says, from that place he preached to him the word of God, that Jesus Christ, the Son of God, born of a virgin, laid in a manger, lived a perfect life. And when he went to the cross, he opened not his mouth. He wasn't the guilty one. He was paying the price of sin for all the guilty ones. And this Ethiopian, we don't have any reason to think he knows anything more than what he's just been told. He says, see, here is water. Can I be baptized? What hinders me from being baptized? He doesn't know how everything in the Bible connects to him. Maybe he doesn't know how everything connects to the Ethiopian people and the Cushites in the 25th dynasty of Egypt. He just knows this guy says, someone died in my place for my sins. What hinders me from being baptized? And Philip, who was the preacher, said, let's do it. And they both got down into the water and he baptized him. And in the third service today after 11 o'clock, we're going to baptize 3 children who maybe they don't know everything there is to know about the Bible and how it connects to them, but they're old enough to sense, I am a sinner. I'm a sinner. Jesus died in my place for my sin, and I trust in him.
Hi, it's Pastor Brian, and I hope this sermon is helping you become good, glad, and strong in your faith. But remember, there's just nothing like being a part of your own local church. So if you're in the North Phoenix area, you should join us this Sunday. And if you do, make sure you find me and say hello. And if you're not in North Phoenix, our team would consider it a real honor to help get you connected to a church near you. Just email us at hello@valleylife.church, and we'll do our very best to help you out. Now, you can always find more podcasts, community groups, service opportunities, and even a giving link on our app and on our website. Press on.